In this segment, we're going to build on some of the ideas we just covered regarding the rise of the papacy in the 11th century to be a centralizing power and directing a lot of that power, both economic and military power, into expanding the Crusades into the Middle East, into Jerusalem especially, and of course remember all the different people involved in that first crusade, including the Italian merchants from many of the city-states who, both with the first and subsequent crusades, will be of course benefiting very greatly from that traffic. But the idea there was that there's a centralizing authority, that it's not just being spread all over the place, that there are increasingly concentrations of power. There's lots of European monarchs who are going to like that idea and try to find a way to centralize their power. For our purposes, we'd like to take a look at England as one of the first places where that is going to be very evident, a centralization of power, in part because, remember, when William of Normandy had conquered England in 1066, he had brought over this connection to his French territories, so now all English kings are going to be linked to France for quite some time, but he also brought over a centralizing feudal monarchy that he imposed on England and was very successful at controlling. He was able to extract lots of tax revenue, as we know from the Doomsday Survey. But the thing here is that his descendants are going to build on that power, or try to build on that power, one of them being King Henry II, who before he dies in 1189 leaves behind a state for his sons that is highly centralized, very powerful, and very wealthy. His attempt to do so, to create this central power, had of course been based on his control of the judiciary and that system of law courts and circuit court judges that in many ways had imposed royal power on all of England. Now, one of his sons who inherits the throne, King John I, in 1199, is then going to inherit a very strong system of government, a very powerful, centralized one. And for a good monarch who's able to balance all the competing issues within the nobility and the church, it should be an operational gold mine, that the king should be able to utilize the sources of all his people. John, unfortunately, does not have that kind of issue. He's not exactly the best in terms of working with his churchmen and with the nobles and the major landowners and business people. He is not really able to do that effectively, even though his father had set him up for that. Okay? So the key issues for us to think about here as we go towards the Magna Carta, towards this large break in the legal system in England, is that we're taking a look at how are taxes collected, at what rates, how, both inheritance taxes and other forms of taxation. We're also looking at the ability of the king to be militarily successful. Remember, the English king has territories in England and then, of course, continues to have various territories on the mainland of Europe in France. We're also going to take a look at the idea that since John is in many ways going to be very, very difficult to work with, so to speak, he's going to get into conflicts, for example, with the bishops of Rome. The Pope is at one point in time going to declare interdict, and what that means is that all the churches in England are closed, which means all the people and all the nobility who are trying to have baptisms and sanctify marriages, also have different wills go through the legal system of the courts to be proven for the heirs to get their inheritances. There's lots of people very upset with John when he goes into this scenario where he's fighting the papacy. And then, of course, there is a simple case where, once again, we have an excommunication issue. John is excommunicated by the Pope, and that's going to create a whole bunch of problems in terms of his ability to serve as a feudal lord, because all feudal contracts are only valid between Christians. Now, as he moves forward and creates lots of problems for himself, John is increasingly alienating himself from many of the most powerful people, especially in the church. But what's going to happen then is that he is essentially going to create the conditions where lots of people are going to ally against him. The church, the major nobles of the landowners, also the business community in many of the larger cities of England, they all see John and his relatively abusive and arbitrary taxes as a problem. And he makes the very disunited forces come together on the basis of mutual hatred of him. And in the 1215, after a series of battles, the English are going to end up having what's going to be called the Magna Carta. And this is just an idea here that I placed. You'll find a translation of the Magna Carta in many places in English. This, of course, is a picture of one of the copies of it. There's multiple copies. But take a look at it because it has several clauses that in many ways are simply dealing with feudalism. But here's the idea. He has to sign this document because he's lost the war, right? He has lost the war, and now he has to deal with these issues. He has to guarantee church freedom because he'd interfered greatly inside the Roman Catholic Church in England. He has to promise to step aside, leave it alone. That will be a difficult promise for any monarch to keep. He also is going to say that he will live under the rule of law. He guarantees inside the Magna Carta the idea that he will live under the law, which is a unique development. Instead of the king saying they are the law, or the representative of, say, God on earth to represent the law, now the king actually has to live under the law, and that's the interpretation many people will have. And they want to keep that because John had been in many ways sort of abusive and arbitrary in some of his things, for example, with inheritance taxes, where he had one set of standards for one family and another for another. There was a very difficult issue there. Now, he is then now going to promise to live under the law. That will be a major challenge because most monarchs don't like to do that. They like untrammeled or unfettered power of absolute authority. John, in the situation, looking at it, signs Magna Carta at the end of a short civil war, but almost immediately wants to do away with it, all right? Inside the document itself, it is going to prepare people for the idea that the king will have fair taxation for all, inheritance and other taxes. It is also going to be looking at the idea that the king cannot arbitrarily interfere in things that revolve around property. And that includes everything from marriage of heiresses to the idea of inheritance taxes, to also the idea that customs revenue, which in many places customarily set at a certain rate, that is going to maintain itself. What you want to think about here with the English focus on the Magna Carta is that it is an opportunity for the wealthy people to impose some of their ideas on the king and restrain him by law. It's interpreted first as a feudal document, only applying to the elite people, but over time it's going to leak down to the next lower layers of the socioeconomic pile, the smaller landowners and smaller business people, who will then interpret this document as applying to them as well, that the king will live by the law. Be sure to take a closer look inside your reading materials about all the things regarding Magna Carta, and then of course, make sure you look for all those sample questions on your test guide.